There's a question I did not think I would be asking or discussing on August 19th, 2025, a week or so away from the start of the SEC football season, just a few days away from the start of week 0 in college football in 2025. Auburn has how many national championships? If you thought you knew the answer, you thought wrong. Unless you woke up early this morning and you discovered that Auburn is changing its tune on that subject. Auburn has decided to not be so conservative. Auburn, of course, is a very conservative institution of higher learning. It's also been very conservative in celebrating its own football history in many, many ways, most notably in how many national championships it claims, it honors, it celebrates. Well, Auburn just went from, depending on who is doing the counting, from 2 to 9. It is now the official position of Auburn University Athletics, according to Athletics Director John Cohen, that Auburn will recognize, honor, and celebrate 9 national championship football teams through the years, going all the way back to 1910. We're going to get into the details in a moment. But first of all, kudos to Jason Caldwell from 24/7 Sports, Auburn Undercover, Justin Hokanson from Auburn on 3. They broke the story this morning that Auburn has this in the works, and they got a statement from John Cohen. And let me start with this. What the athletic director had to say. Oh, it's over here. First of all, I did find it interesting. Auburn's Twitter account this morning, the pinned post, it's actually a video, but this is the text that accompanies it. It says, "Nothing given, everything earned." And we're going to get into that idea, that notion, a little further as we discuss whether Auburn should have and should, going forward, acknowledge 9 national championships in football. Here's the statement from John Cohen, the Auburn Athletics Director. "For too long, Auburn has chosen a humble approach to our program's storied history, choosing to recognize only Associated Press national championships. Starting this fall, we've made the decision to honor the accomplishments of our deserving student athletes, coaches, and teams from Auburn's proud history. Our visible national championship recognitions now align with the well-established standards used by the NCAA's official record book and our peers across the nation." And he's not wrong about that. That is the way that many other schools do recognize their own national championships, because someone, somewhere, at some time, some official, and you can quibble with the word official, but some official elector organization that awards national championships decided that Auburn was the national champion for a particular year that until now Auburn has not really embraced. So let's get into it. Let's start with Auburn's no-brainer, no-doubter national championships. Everyone thinks of Auburn as having 2 natties in that regard. 1957, the undefeated season, Coach Ralph Shug Jordan, whose name, of course, is on the stadium, one of the greatest gentlemen who ever coached in college football, served in the United States Army during World War II, was there at D-Day. If you have any question about Ralph Shug Jordan's credentials as a man. He was the head coach when Auburn went undefeated. As I said, 1957, they were awarded the Associated Press National Championship. They won the SEC that year. No dispute, no debate, no doubt Auburn was the national champion that year. And then in 2010, we all saw it. We witnessed Cam Newton, the one-man wrecking crew, just wreaking havoc throughout the SEC, in the SEC championship game against South Carolina, and then in the national championship game, the BCS national championship game against Oregon, 14-0, 8-0 in the SEC. Gene Chizik was the head coach. That was a unanimous title. There is no dispute whatsoever about who was the best team in the country that year, because it was led by the best player in the country. And we're going to talk about Cam Newton in a little more detail, because Auburn has decided to add another honor, well-earned and well-deserved, to his resume. So those are the no-doubters. Those are the ones that when you went into Jordan-Hare Stadium for years and years and years, Those were the years that were recognized in the stadium. Those were the ones they highlighted in the media guide. But there were a couple of others, 3 others to be precise, that I dubbed them, well, national champions, if you insist. And Auburn doesn't, in the going back as recently as their 2024 football media guide, they, in the separate section they have for national champions, they recognize 57, they recognize 2010. They don't name these as well, but in the year-by-year compilation of their records and individual game results, they do note, as you can see there, 1913 under the legendary Mike Donahue, not a name that might be familiar to modern college football fans, but he did a fantastic job at Auburn. They were recognized by the Billingsley organization as national champions. Then again in 1983, and this one is somewhat controversial, obviously. Everyone remembers Miami went into the bowl games with a loss, as Auburn did. Miami was ranked number 5. They beat Nebraska, which was considered one of the greatest teams of all time. Miami wins by a point. Nebraska goes for a 2-pointer at the end of the game to try to win the national championship. Tom Osborne could have won it by settling for an extra point and a tie, but kudos to him. He will go down in history for not settling for the tie, going for the win, going for the title, and they came up short. They threw a pass, not really the Nebraska way, got broken up by Miami, and Miami was awarded the national championship by a number of different organizations, the AP, the UPI at the time. But Auburn was named national champions in 83, and that was Bo Jackson as a sophomore, Pat Dye, the head coach. The New York Times computer rankings had Auburn as the national champion, and a couple of other organizations as well. And then in 1993, we all remember how Terry Bowden burst on the scene. We had an interesting conversation with him on the Auburn Undercover podcast a couple of weeks ago, and that team went undefeated. And what's especially notable about that team is that they were put on probation after Terry Bowden was hired, after he was introduced, based on some shenanigans, according to the NCAA, which seems really quaint now, given the slap on the wrist. I don't care if it's a $20 million slap on the wrist. I don't care if it's a $30 million slap on the wrist. When you look back, and if you read, and trust me, I was there, I was following it, I was digging into it at the time. If you go back and you look at what Auburn was hammered for, with 2 years of a postseason ban, 2 years of no television appearances. How about that? They don't do that anymore. I haven't done that for a long time. And then you look at Michigan being allowed to keep its national championship from 2023, despite the Connor Stallion Spygate, his KGB organization burying evidence at the bottom of a pond, refusing to cooperate. Jim Harbaugh, one of the biggest cheaters in college football history. All you need to know about Jim Harbaugh is the man is, well, he was given a 10-year show cause penalty by the NCAA for this infractions case, but he can't start serving that until he completes the 4-year show cause penalty he was given for a previous infractions case at Michigan. So get out of here, Michigan man, with your holier-than-thou attitude that you're better than everyone else. Your school's better than every other school. You operate on a higher plane. That balloon got shot down and burned with fire the other day when the NCAA released its penalties against Michigan. But I digress. That 1993 Auburn team was fantastic. And what really set it apart was it was not allowed to play in the SEC championship game, but Auburn can certainly claim that it was the best team in the SEC that year because it beat the SEC West champion, Alabama, and it beat the SEC East champion, Florida. And, of course, Alabama and Florida did play in the national championship game. That was the second and final SEC championship game here in Birmingham at Legion Field, and Florida beat Alabama on that occasion. So Auburn was clearly the best team in the SEC. And if you were the best team in the SEC, you could make a claim for national champions. So Auburn has kind of, sort of recognized those 3 teams, which, if you're counting, that would give them 5. But they're not stopping there under John Cohen. They are going full celebration, full recognition, because there are other years in Auburn football history in which some organization, some relatively credible organization that awarded national championships named the Tigers as number one. Let's look at those. And these are the new ones. These are the ones really that were added in this news that came out this morning. I could say on further review, Auburn is going to recognize 1910, a 6-1 season under Mike Donahue. I think they were undefeated in their conference that year, didn't give up a point, and their only loss was to Texas, which was not in the conference that Auburn was in at the time. In 1914, another undefeated season under Mike Donahue. They were conference champions that year as well. In 1958, which would have given Sugar Jordan back-to-back titles, they were awarded a national championship by at least one, maybe more than one outfit that year. LSU was given the AP national champion that year. LSU and Auburn did not play, unfortunately. There weren't as many SEC games back then. And then the one that a lot of people still remember, of course, 2004. This was the year that really sparked the move that led us to a college football playoff. When USC started the season as number one and went undefeated. Oklahoma started the season at number 2 and went undefeated. Auburn started the season at number 17 and went undefeated. And because you had a BCS championship system, you could only put 2 teams in the BCS championship game. And Auburn actually late in the season tied Oklahoma for number 2 in the BCS. But in the final accounting, Oklahoma got the number 2 spot according to the polls and computers that were used at the time in the BCS, and Auburn was on the outside looking in. Auburn went to the Sugar Bowl, beat Virginia Tech, which I remember distinctly. I was not able to cover that game, which I normally would have, because my wife was about to give birth to our second son, Cannon. So that Auburn team with Ronnie Brown, Cadillac Williams, Jason Campbell, Carlos Rogers, they had 4 first-round draft picks, which was a record for the SEC at the time. That was a dominant Auburn football team. And one of the most embarrassing things about Auburn football, though, if you'll notice, if you look really close, under national champions, it says People's Choice. There was a media outlet, I think it was in Eufaula, Alabama, that named Auburn the People's Choice national champion. That was a little embarrassing. Not quite as tongue-in-cheek as the Golf Digest national championship that Tommy Tuberville lobbied for and was awarded. Of course, no one took that seriously. That was just all in fun and good spirit. But that was a national championship team. And again, I've said this before. I will continue to say it. That Auburn team, if they had played USC in the national championship game, and of course, USC had to vacate the national championship because of NCAA infractions related to Reggie Bush, their star running back, playmaker. I think Auburn could have played with USC. If you look at that Auburn team, not the 2 years before when USC beat Auburn in 2002 in Los Angeles, in 2003 back on the Plains. Yeah, USC was a better team than Auburn. They beat them 2 in a row. But that 2004 Auburn team was different. That Auburn team in 2004 had a swagger about it. It had a toughness about it. It beat Nick Saban's defending BCS champions from LSU 10-9 with a late comeback drive in one of the most physical, brutal games I've ever witnessed in person. And Jason Campbell led a game-winning touchdown drive to beat Saban and LSU in a championship-type game. So that Auburn team certainly is worthy. So that if you're counting now, that gives Auburn 9 national championships. And so the question becomes at this point, why now? Why now, Auburn? Why now, John Cohen? Why is Auburn now choosing, especially on the eve of a new college football season, why would they decide that this is the time to recognize those teams? First of all, let's establish this. I don't care if you're an Alabama fan. I don't care if you're a Florida fan. I don't care if you're a Georgia fan and you think this is all nonsense. It is not your decision on what national championships Auburn University should choose to recognize. That is an Auburn decision, and Auburn's alone. And this conversation didn't just start a week ago. or whenever John Cohen decided to get these wheels in motion. And they're going to recognize these teams, we should note, according to the reporting by Justin Hokanson and Jason Caldwell, they are going to honor these teams with signage at the stadium and in other ways. So that's an Auburn decision, okay? Whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not as a neutral observer, that's Auburn's choice to make. And they didn't just start considering this summer. I can go back to 2013 at the end of that season. That's when Auburn came out of nowhere, suffered an early season loss to LSU, and then ran the table to get into the national championship game, the last BCS championship game before the 14 playoff arrived, which, as we said, was sparked by Auburn not being allowed into the BCS mix with an undefeated team in 2004. Mike Slive swore that would never happen again, and he would see to it that they would have some sort of playoff in which an undefeated SEC champion would have a chance to compete for a national championship. So on the eve of it was in January, so it was the 2014 BCS championship game. We were in Pasadena, California, and the day before the game, Auburn was going to play Florida State for the championship. I sat down with then Auburn Athletics Director Jay Jacobs, and this was very much on his mind. Auburn's national championship history. What years should they recognize? What years should they celebrate? What years should have signage in the stadium designating them as national champions, as some reputable organization had named them at the time? And Jay Jacobs had, in addition to being an Auburn man, he had a special personal dog in the fight, if you will, because he was on the 1983 team that did everything you should have been able to do or should have had to do to win a national championship, given that all of the contenders at the end had one loss, including Miami, which lost to Florida to start that season, if you recall. So Jay Jacobs said they were thinking about it. It was very much on their minds. And they were going to, but they were going to do it deliberately, thoughtfully. They were going to reach out to their stakeholders. I don't know if they took an actual poll at the time, but they did. They didn't want to just claim these championships. They wanted to have some feedback from their fan base, from their supporters, from their lettermen, etc. And nothing really ever came of it, but at least the thought was alive and well at the time. And we have to really give credit to an Auburn graduate, an attorney named Michael Skotnicki. And Michael, some years ago, wrote a book called Auburn's Unclaimed National Championships. He took this seriously. He did voluminous research. And he made a case that in addition to the most obvious recognized national titles that Auburn had from 57 and 2010, that Auburn should claim 7 others. And the 7 others that Michael Skotnicki detailed, outlined, researched, and wrote about in his book are now the 7 others that Auburn itself will finally, after all these years, recognize. So kudos to Michael Skotnicki. He was well ahead of the curve, and I think his book may have had some influence with some Auburn people. But again, you may ask, why now? Why is this happening now? Again, it's not a new idea. But what Auburn's opponents, Auburn's rivals, Auburn's detractors will say is Auburn somehow, and try to follow the logic of this, Auburn somehow realizes that this Hugh Freeze experiment is not going to work out. That as much as people are starting quietly to jump on the Auburn bandwagon in the sense that this is the year or they turn it around. This is the year they have a winning record for the first time since 2020. This is the year they don't lose 7 games. They go to a bowl game. Maybe they put themselves, as Hugh Freeze suggested they would, in the playoff discussion later in the season. That despite all that optimism, Jackson Arnold, a great wide receiver room, a defense that could be really, really strong. Despite all of that, that's not happening. It's not going to happen this year. So to distract from that, to deflect from that, they're going to start claiming national championships from the past. Do you know how idiotic that sounds? and I didn't just make this up. I'm already getting feedback on Twitter this morning in discussing this subject. And I made the note in which, before I read the John Cohen quote, very similar to him. Auburn's been very conservative in honoring its own football past. In contrast to someone kind of close to home that Auburn knows well, its chief rival, Alabama. And Alabama claims, I believe, 18 national championships now. Some of them, many of them, not disputed, but some of them have been disputed and should be disputed, led by 1941. They didn't win the SEC. I think they finished number 20 in the AP poll. They may have lost to Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. And yet somehow someone did recognize them as national champions. I'm not sure how, but Alabama claims that in its long list of national titles. So, again, but that's Alabama's choice to make. And one of the unsung heroes in Alabama history on that score is Wayne Atchison, their sports information director of a long time ago, back when Ray Perkins became the head coach, succeeded Bear Bryant. And Wayne Atchison was looking for a way to create some enthusiasm and excitement about the program and to highlight the history of Alabama football. And he found some national championships from the 20s, the 30s, before the SEC began in 1933, just after the SEC began. In 1934 was one of them. 1941 was one of them. And all of a sudden, he started including those championships in the media guide. And Alabama started to emphasize the number. And all of a sudden, they go from 6 to 12. And then they go from 12 to 13 and 13 to 14, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Nick Saban wins 6, and Gene Stallings won 1. And now that number just resonates. So, but that was Alabama's choice to make, just as it is Auburn's choice to make. And in another, and so it's kind of hypocritical, especially if you're an Alabama fan and you want to poke fun at Auburn, which is, again, you wake up wanting to do that. That's natural. That's what rivalries are all about. But this is probably not the hill to die on. It's probably not the area where you really want to jump on the bandwagon and say, look at little brother trying to be like big brother Alabama and claim more national championships. Let's be clear. In every year that Auburn's going to recognize, some relatively legitimate organization named them the national champions after that season. They didn't do it 50 years later. They didn't do it 100 years later. 1910 was the earliest one on this list that they're adding. It was done at the time. And there were a lot of people recognizing national champions at the time. And you could say some were more legit than others. The AP, of course, didn't start until 1936. Most people look at that as the gold standard until we got to the BCS championship era in 1998. And then we graduated to the 14 playoff and now a 12-team playoff. So it is more legitimate than ever. It's more difficult than ever to win a national championship. Obviously, you don't have 3, 4, 5, 6 different teams earning recognition from 3, 4, 5, 6 different organizations the way you did back in the day. But hey, that's college football history. It's messy. It is controversial. It's not clean. It's not. I'm with you, Carol. I see, especially the 83 and long time overdue, especially the 83 and 04 teams. Look, 83, I was in graduate school at the University of Florida. The very first college football game, college football game I ever went to. And for those of you who don't know my background, I grew up in Pennsylvania, graduated from high school there before I moved south with my family, and ended up going to Troy State instead of Penn State, where I was enrolled to go to school. And I went to graduate school in journalism at Florida. And I was there in 1983, that 83 season, in the stands in Florida Field at the time. It wasn't the Swamp yet. It wasn't Ben Hill Griffin Stadium yet. It was Florida Field. And the first game of the year, Miami came into Gainesville and got spanked by Charlie Pell and company. And that was Miami's only loss. And then they went on, as I said, to beat Nebraska in the national championship game, an incredible Orange Bowl. So they had a loss, though. Auburn had a loss to Texas that year. Texas had a loss. All the top contenders had a loss. But Auburn and Miami, among the top contenders, were the only ones that won their bowl game. And yet, all the sentiment, the television hype, NBC covering the Orange Bowl, talking about it as the national championship game, which naturally they would do. They were carrying the game. They wanted more eyeballs on television sets. So they hyped it as a national championship game. It wasn't really, but Miami ended up winning the most recognized titles. But that 83 Auburn team, people like Kevin Green on defense, Bo Jackson as a sophomore on offense, that was a championship team. As was the 04 team under Tommy Tuberville. I can make that case. And like I said, I will argue about their ability to compete with USC had they gotten the opportunity. The one thing we might question is when USC was stripped of its championship, they didn't award it to anyone. And remember, the NCAA doesn't award national championships in football, so they can't strip them away. They couldn't take away Michigan's 2023 national championship. They could have vacated some victories had they chosen to do so. Before news broke about Connor Stallions during that season and his Spygate operation, his little KGB band of ne'er-do-wells out videotaping signals at different games. Stallions himself on the sideline. They acknowledged that at a Central Michigan game to gather intel on the signs of Michigan State, which, of course, Michigan would play later in the season. But the NCAA doesn't award championships. The AP does. Now it's the college football playoff that awards the national championship. So it's just a different world, but that's college football. That's what we love about it. That's why things like this insane trial balloon that the Big Ten just floated. 2014 playoff? What about a 2018 playoff? Me being occasionally a conspiracy theorist, because I've seen some conspiracies come together, and I've put some conspiracies together in my time as a reporter. Isn't it interesting that all of these national college football reporters reported on this trial balloon by the Big Ten to expand the playoff 16? Forget about 16. Let's go to 24. Oh, no, wait. What about 28? Maybe we should go to 28. Maybe the SEC and the Big Ten should be guaranteed 7 playoff spots. And if you get to a playoff in which the 7th place SEC team and the 7th place Big Ten team are allowed into the playoff, you might as well put a stake through the heart of college football. Because one of the things we love about this messy, untidy, controversial, chaotic sport is the fact that its regular season matters more than any other regular season in any other sport. It's not quite at the point that we remember, a lot of us remember growing up, where every game was Armageddon. Every loss was a cause to put you in a coffin. Your season was over. Your coach was no good. Your quarterback should be benched. Every game mattered, though. Now, that's not quite the same with a 12-team playoff, but there's still something special. Think about next weekend. Don't tell me about Farmageddon in Ireland. College football starts when the SEC starts. So next weekend, when Texas goes to Ohio State and Alabama goes to Florida State and LSU goes to the other Death Valley, Clemson, and the night before on Friday night when Auburn goes to Baylor, that's college football. That's every game mattering. Narratives will be formed on those 60 minutes of football in each of those places. Those narratives may prove to be wrong, but those narratives they won't be set in stone, but they will create a conversation that can carry over, that can set a tone for a season for an Auburn and a Hugh Freeze, for example, who's trying to turn that thing around after 2 losing seasons. And this is the year he's got to prove it or lose his job, in my opinion. Auburn people may think differently. John Cohen may think differently. But we're going to bring this thing full circle. And the one thing about Auburn, though, that is not in dispute, there is no debate about another move that Auburn made in the last couple of days. Auburn announced that it is going to retire the number 2 jersey of Cam Newton. Is there anyone on God's green earth that would disagree with that decision? I cannot imagine. Cam Newton put together the single most impactful season of any college football player on any college football team in the history of the game in 2010. And if you don't believe that, don't give me Joe Burrow in 2019 LSU. He had an unbelievable season. He was surrounded by NFL talent. Don't give me Barry Sanders in Oklahoma State back in the day. He didn't win a national championship. Don't give me any other player on any other team, because that Auburn team, with all due respect, without Cam Newton, is 7-5 at best. Because that Auburn team with Cam Newton had to go to the wire and come from and lead a late touchdown drive, a late field goal drive to beat Kentucky in Lexington. That Auburn team barely escaped Starkville in Mississippi State. That Auburn team had to beat Clemson in Jordan-Hare Stadium in overtime. And that Auburn team put itself in a 24-0 hole in Tuscaloosa against Nick Saban's most talented Alabama team. Yeah, they'd lost a couple of games before that, but there was more talent on that Alabama team than any Saban team before or since. And Auburn fell into the deepest hole against the most hostile crowd, and Cam Newton led him out of it. Not with his legs, and he ran for almost 1,500 yards that year for the Tigers, but with his arm. That season doesn't happen without Cam Newton. So retiring Cam Newton's number 2 jersey is a natural. It's a no-brainer. And now Auburn is saying, recognizing the teams beyond Cam Newton's 2010 team, beyond Shug Jordan's 1957 team, as national champions, is now a no-brainer. And I say, hey, Auburn, go for it. Your decision, your history, your program, your stadium, your signage, your celebration. Live it up, enjoy it, hype it to the max. And then go out and beat Baylor. Go have a winning season. Make Auburn football matter again in the SEC and on the national scene, because it's been far too long. That's all I've got to say about that. All right, I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This has been Scarbo Knows. Thank you for checking this out. Make sure you check out our sponsor, Money Management Services, a family-owned, fee-only financial services company right here in Birmingham, throughout the state of Alabama. Reach out to the Rice family. You will be glad you did. See you next time.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.